Peace and love, men and women out there. Welcome back to our discussion on the muscular system. In this video, we're going to talk about the parts of a sarcomere. So pause the video right now, actually, and just Google an image to have up while we're explaining different parts of this sarcomere here. I have piss poor handwriting, to be honest, so just look at a picture. It's going to be much easier. All this will make sense when I'm going through it here. So see you back here in a second. Alright, cool. We got the picture up. Good. Okay, yeah. Yeah, that looks like the correct picture. So, parts of a sarcomere. We got the I band, the Z line, A band, H zone, and then the myosin heads here. So let's start with the I band. That's the part that's just the thin filament. So there's thick filament and thin filament. The part that's just the thin filament on a sarcomere is it's called the I band. So essentially, from A band to A band is the I band. Just the thin filament is the I band, though. And then the Z line is the parts. From Z line to Z line is one sarcomere, essentially. So we got the Z lines, we got the I bands, and now let's dig into the A band. So secondly, also the Z lines is where the thin filaments intersect. So Z line, there's thin filament on this side, and then some thin filament on that side. The intersection is this Z line. But Z line to Z line is one sarcomere here. So think of my head as the sarcomere. But the I band is the part that's the full thick filament. So the entirety of the thick filament, plus whatever thin filament is above or below it, that's the A band. So it's the full thick filament and then some thin filament as well. The H zone is the part in the middle that's just thick filament, so no thin filament in the H zone. And then the myosin heads, it's the parts of the thin filament that look like a little porcupine. So let's say that, like, these little things would be the myosin heads, the fingies I'm moving there. So myosin heads, what they do is they're thick filament that binds to thin filament, and it pulls the, this is the thick filament, let's say, and then there's thin filament above it. What it does is the myosin heads bind to thin filament and pull the thin filament towards the center of the sarcomere. So it just allows for greater overlapping there. So whenever the myosin heads pull the thin filament towards the center of the sarcomere, there's greater overlapping, and we'll learn why all this happens momentarily here. But so the myosin heads bind to the thin filament, pull it closer to the sarcomere. So when the muscle contracts, that's just looking at a relaxed sarcomere. When the muscle contracts, the I band actually becomes shorter. So the I band becomes shorter because there's greater overlapping. It appears shorter. The H zone, part in the middle that's just thick filament, it'll either shorten or completely disappear because there's greater overlapping. The A band will stay the same exact length because the length of the myofilaments, the thin or the thick filament, the length does not change. There's just a greater overlapping and contraction. So this thin filament, thick filament, the actual lengths are not getting shorter or longer. There's just greater overlapping, which makes it almost appear shorter, but it's just greater overlapping. So the greater overlapping is what happens whenever muscle contraction occurs. So an analogy for this would be like just think of the sliding of the thin and thick filaments across each other in muscle contraction as putting on a sock on your foot. So as you put on a sock, there's greater overlapping of the sock on the foot. So think of like the sock is the thin filament pulling across the foot as you slide it on. So the length of the sock, the length of the foot stay the same length, but as you pull the sock on the foot, the thin filament over the thick filament, greater overlapping. That's what happens in muscle contraction. So just recap, both the foot and sock stay the same length, but they're now greater overlapping across each other. There's socks pulling across the foot, aka the thick filament there. So yeah, we got the I band, it's just a thin filament. Z line, from Z line to Z line, one sarcomere. A band is the part that's the full thick filament, also some thin filament there. H zone is the part in the middle that's just thick filament. Myosin heads are thick filament that binds to the thin filament. pulls them closer towards the sarcomere for greater overlapping. In muscle contraction, the I bands shorten, or the I band shortens, H zone shortens, perhaps disappears. The A bands stay the same length, but there are greater overlapping there. And obviously, the reverse would happen in relaxation. So the H zone would reappear, the I bands would become longer, and then the A band would still stay the same length. There would just be less overlap.